Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. I'm Esther Littlefield, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Have you ever received a handwritten note, a gift, or even just a phone call or text that came at just the right time? Maybe you were feeling down and discouraged, and this small gesture from someone else helped turn your day around. I know that has happened to me, and I am always amazed at how powerful such a small gesture can be. And that's the power of encouragement. And it's actually not an optional part of our life and leadership as a Christian. Scripture reminds us that we should be encouraging one another. But what does this look like practically? And how can we figure out our own unique ways of offering encouragement? In today's conversation, Holly and I speak with Kari Bartkus of doesnt. Kari shares her leadership journey and how she shifted from being in ministry to now running her own business. She is passionate about being present and showing up for others who are hurting around her. And this is really how her business began. In our conversation today, Kari is sharing all about why encouragement is so important and how we can practically learn our unique styles of encouraging others. We also talk about why we as leaders sometimes need to be willing to ask for encouragement and receive it from others. Now, not to be too obvious, but I know this episode is going to encourage you because Kari is one of the kindest, sweetest people I have ever known. She has encouraged me many times through simple emails and comments online, and I am really thrilled to be able to share this episode with you today. Now, make sure to check out the show notes for this episode after you listen so that you can connect with Kari and learn more about what she offers. As always, you can find the show notes on my website, estherlittlefield.com, and just put /episode 137 after that, and you'll get right to those show notes for today's episode. All right, let's go ahead and dive into our conversation with Kari. All right. Well, welcome, Kari, to the podcast. We are super excited to chat with you today. So to get us started, could you share a little bit about what your life and leadership looks like right now?
Sure. So my name is Kari Bartkus, and I am a wife to my husband, Mike. And I've got 2 kiddos. I have an 8-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. And we live in a small town in Indiana. And I recently kind of dove into my business called doesnt. And that is a place where we really try to help others learn how to encourage those around them, specifically those who are grieving or going through difficult times. You know, a lot of times we have those questions of, well, what do I say and what do I do? And so we try to help answer those questions and help women figure that part out.
I love that. I think that's so important. It's sometimes a really hard place to be in to not quite know how to approach that, but we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So if you could kind of travel back in time and let us know about your leadership journey and how you kind of got to where you are now.
Sure. So I was actually a very shy child, very quiet, sitting in back of the classroom, just doing my thing. Even at home, I didn't really talk a whole lot. And so to think about myself as a leader back in those days, I liked to help other people and I liked to do things well. and I was very responsible. And so it seemed that I got volunteered for a lot of things, the group projects, being the one to organize everything or make sure that things got done. But if I found something that I was truly passionate about, something that I really enjoyed, I would very slowly, get my hand raised to volunteer for that. Like, I want to do that part. And I really got to exercise a lot of those leadership skills because I attended a smaller church. And so by the time I was in junior high, I was already teaching the next Sunday school class below me. And by the time we were in high school, my sister and I co-led our youth group because we wanted a youth group. And so we decided we were going to lead one. And it was after I graduated from high school that I kind of started on this journey in church ministry. And so I was a youth director for a while, and then I was a communication team administrator. So I did a lot of project management and writing and editing. And then I transitioned over to being an office manager at a smaller church. And then finally, I ended with being a children's ministry director. And none of those are like head leadership roles. Like I'm always serving underneath someone else, but there are still leadership roles and places where I got to grow and learn and make lots of mistakes, but still serve people in a way that I felt that God had wired me.
I love that. So could you share if there's any particular leadership lessons that you've learned through those different experiences that you've had, whether it's when you were younger in your high school years or all the way into the church leadership that you did?
Yeah. So one of the biggest lessons you actually talked about recently on the podcast, and that was about leading small, being part of a small church, both growing up and now, what your Sunday school classrooms aren't very big. And so you might only have 1, 2, 3 kids in there. And when I attended larger churches, when there were only 1 or 2 kids in there, sometimes they would just be like, all right, well, let's just play for the hour and we'll skip the lesson. And that's what they decided to do. And I can understand that to some extent. But I really felt like when we did stuff like that, we missed out on that opportunity to really have that one-on-one conversation or get to know the kids better. When I was a children's ministry director, when I only had 1 or 2 kids in there, I really got to know those 1 or 2 kids that day. We had lots of really good conversations and we got to check in. And so having those smaller audiences, it feels kind of weird sometimes because it's not what you're used to or it's not what you think it should be. But man, what an opportunity to reach out to those people that show up. And so I really like that idea of leading small. If you have a class or you have something that you're offering out to people and only 1 or 2 people show up, it's really easy to feel disheartened. But again, what a powerful time that could be for you to meet together. And so leading small was really one of the biggest lessons I learned. And it does seem to suit me a little bit better because I am more introverted. And so even though I like public speaking and things like that, I also like the one-on-one conversations that you get to have. So leading small would definitely be one lesson. And another would be what I'm going to call leading up. And so again, those leadership positions that I had weren't like the end. I wasn't always the head of everyone. I was always serving underneath someone. And so when I was leading, it wasn't just leading those underneath me, my volunteers or other team members or the kids. It was also leading up to my supervisors and trying to find ways to encourage them too.
So I just love that perspective. And I'm wondering if you could a little bit more into leading small. Is there a certain perspective or characteristic or mindset that you have that kind of helps you sort of stay in that leading small idea? I know a lot of us want to really, get to those higher next levels and sometimes get discontent in those areas. So I'd love for you to kind of let us know how you feel about that, if there's perspective or characteristic that you think is important in leading small.
I think one of the biggest things for me was just valuing each person and seeing as each person as being important. They deserve your time and energy just as much as a whole group of people do. And thinking back to those moments that have meant the most to me as I have tried to learn and grow from others, I learn a lot when I'm sitting in a class or when I'm listening to podcasts or when I'm in those bigger group settings. where it's one person speaking to the many. I learned so much. But those moments that meant the most to me were the people that were sitting in front of me talking one-on-one who knew me and who were speaking the truth directly into my life. And those are the moments I remember. Those are the things that I look back on. And so now as a leader, when I think about the people that I might be trying to lead, that one-to-many communication, it is really important. But those moments when you can find ways to speak one-on-one to people and speak directly to where they're at, or to speak to their personality, or to speak to their heart and the situations that they specifically are dealing with, I just think that can mean so much. And so just really valuing each person and seeing them as being worth your time.
Yeah, that's huge. I agree. It's if you think back in your leadership journey or in just your faith journey, it's oftentimes those one-on-one settings that really have made the biggest impact on us, whether it's, encouraging us into our gifts or, calling out something in us that we never even realized was there. So I love that perspective. So in your business now, Kari, you really have this mission and this passion for encouragement and for helping others be able to encourage people. So I'm curious if you feel like there's a connection between that theme of leading small and this encouragement theme. And if so, what do you think that connection is?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a connection. And I think it's more of that each person is worth it. It's not about generally having that spirit of encouragement is important again, but individually reaching out to each person where they're at and encouraging them in a way that makes sense to them. And so that individual impact and that personal touch just means so much to me. And I really want people to feel like they're valuable and they matter.
Kari, could you tell us why you're so passionate about the topic of encouragement?
I can't stand the thought of someone going through a hardship alone. And I think through my years in church ministry and all the different roles, you see people that are hurting in so many different ways. And sometimes it seems like the church really stepped up and came alongside that individual. And sometimes it just felt like they were getting missed. And it didn't matter the size of the church. And just as I kind of sat back and noticed that, I started wondering, well, what can we do to fix that? Like, how can we make sure that not just people in the church, but people around us, that we are noticing that they are having a hard time and that we can come alongside of them in a way that shows that they really matter. And so there are so many different things that we can do to respond to that. But at the heart of it, it's making sure that they are not missed and finding ways that we can reach out to them so that they aren't hurting alone. Because there's a book called Becoming a Stretcher Bearer by Michael Slater. And the whole premise of his book is that to hurt is bad enough, but to hurt alone destroys people physically and emotionally and spiritually. And I've seen that. I've seen people who feel like they're isolated and alone and that no one cares about them. And yeah, it really stinks when you're sick, but to be sick all by yourself and not have anyone there to help care for you, like, just how tragic is that? And so we're on a mission to to stop that. We want people to feel like they can notice someone who's going through a hard time and find a way to come alongside of them, whether that's just saying hi and being a presence in their life that, I'm here and I see you and I care about you, or whether that's something that's more involved, like watching their kids while they go to a doctor's appointment or something to that effect. Just, we don't want people to hurt by themselves.
Yeah. So you mentioned, that you've seen in the church that there's times when people receive the encouragement and then there's times that they don't. Or maybe sometimes, like what I have seen is sometimes people receive encouragement, but it's not exactly helpful encouragement. And so I'm wondering if you know why maybe we as a church miss the mark sometimes in this area of encouraging one another. What are some of the things we're kind of getting wrong in that process?
I think that sometimes we just don't notice that others are having a hard time. Like we're just too focused on what we're going through, or maybe it's been a busy Sunday morning trying to get ready for church and you're coming in a little bit later than you normally do. And so you're trying to grab your seat and you're just not looking at the people around you as you go in. And so sometimes we just miss it. We're not paying attention. We don't notice that someone's having a hard day. Sometimes I think we notice, but we don't know how to respond. Like we don't know, like, should you go up to them and talk to them about it at church, or should you wait until later and call them, or like, do they even want to hear from you? And so I think sometimes we have all these questions and hesitations in our mind. And so we just keep putting it off until it's too late. And then we feel awkward for bringing it up again, like the next week, and you didn't call or text. And so you say, well, they seem okay today. And you just kind of forget about it. And I think sometimes when we do reach out to encourage them or support them, it's not in a way that they need or find helpful, which makes us want to back up and not do it. And so it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of discernment to know how to reach out to each person. Because, you know what, if my friend is struggling and I see that, I feel like I'm in a better place to reach out to her than I do someone at church that I may not know quite so well. And so trying to navigate that gets really difficult and challenging. And I think sometimes we just get too scared that we just don't want to do it because we feel like we're going to offend them, or we feel like we're intruding in their private lives, because some people are pretty private and they don't want to share. And so I think we're scared sometimes. And so we don't want to do anything.
That's so true. As you were talking, I was kind of thinking, I took the spiritual gifts test and encouragement was not one of my top ones. It was towards the top, but it was probably 8 or 10 down there. And so as a leader, I can think, and I can think that maybe other people might be thinking this too. It's not one of my top gifts. Shouldn't I focus on the things that, that come easiest to me, that, are the things that I really excel at, that God has given me to do, and then let other people who are really good at that do it? So why do you think it's important that this is something that we focus on rather than those top gifts that, not that a gifts test is the end all be all, but you know what I'm saying? It does help identify where we excel. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Well, first, I will say that when you are serving in your area of gifts, you are encouraging others. It may not look the way that you think it should look, but if your gift is teaching and you're teaching others, that's a way that you can encourage them. And if your gift is hospitality and you're opening your home or you're being a friendly face on Sunday mornings, that's a way that you can encourage others. When it comes to encouragement, as far as reaching out to those who are hurting, who are sick, who are grieving or depressed, like that looks different. But I still believe that you can use your gifts in those moments to reach out to those individuals too, keeping in mind that what they need most might be you just to show up and show that you care. Or it might be something like it's an older lady at church who can't clean her home anymore. And so, you know what? You might need a volunteer to go over and clean her house if she's okay with that. It may not be your area of service that you feel most comfortable in, but I believe that God uses those moments to stretch us and grow us. And I find those moments really precious because I experience God in those moments. And I'm trusting that the other person is experiencing God too. And so I would say work in your area of gifts and see how you can use those to encourage those around you. And if you have a friend or someone that's hurting specifically, you can check in and see what maybe they need most. And that might be an area where we need to stretch a little bit more, but it's still a way that we can encourage them too.
So, Kari, you mentioned the idea of discernment a little bit ago in terms of when we're deciding how to encourage someone. So could you talk a little bit more about that? Like, how does discernment play a role in this? And then I have a follow-up question for you after that. So
I believe that while there are some general principles and things that we can follow when it comes to encouraging others, we have to be talking with God and figuring out, well, what's going to be the best for my friend at a specific moment. Like some people out there who say, you know what, if your friend is dealing with cancer, here are some things to say and here are some things not to say. And I appreciate that and I learn from it. You know, some people going through cancer have a hard time hearing those Bible verses in the moment, and some of them need it. And so it's being really dependent on the Holy Spirit to lead you as to what to say and what not to say and what to do for them and what not to do. And so it's knowing your friends and really lifting them up before God and just asking, you know, what can I do right now to be an encouragement to them? And when you feel those little promptings to reach out in some way, it's taking that step of obedience, even though it feels like, are you sure I should be doing this? Like it's still stepping out and obeying God and seeing how God's going to use that work. So for example, if you have a friend that has been chronically ill and you know that the medical bills are piling up, like sometimes you get that little prompting to send a little bit of money their way just to help cover those bills or pay for whatever they need. And some people might question that. And sometimes you might feel a little hesitant, like, well, like, are they going to receive this in the way that I mean them to? And we start questioning. But if God's prompting you to share in that way and to reach out, then you send it and you pray about it and you trust the Holy Spirit to work. And you can't control how they're going to respond. But if the Holy Spirit's leading you that way, then you can trust that it's going to be okay. So just being able to discern, really staying close enough to Him that you can hear His promptings or follow those nudges. It's a lot about paying attention, not just to your friend, but to what He's leading you to do.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. Okay, so that follow-up question is more on the flip side of things. I'm just thinking about sometimes if you're in a leadership role or in a ministry role, sometimes there's an expectation on leaders to always be the ones doing the encouraging. And also there's an expectation that the leader will always know about the people who need the encouraging. And I'm just curious, I don't know exactly how to word the question, but like, how much responsibility does the person who needs the encouragement have to share the needs? I guess when they have, like, if they're in a situation where they need encouraging, do you think that they need to share that somehow or ask for what they need? Like, instead of, I have a diagnosis, I get some serious diagnosis and somebody does something for me that's not helpful and I get upset about it, rather than what if I had said, oh, I need this XYZ thing. This would be most helpful for me. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that it can get sticky, especially in church situations where there's like offense happening or like expectations that maybe are a little bit unrealistic. And how do we work through that, I guess? If you have any tips on that.
So I definitely agree. I feel like a lot of times, especially in the smaller churches, there's this expectation on the senior pastor that he is going to be the one personally responding to everything. And it's not realistic. And it puts an unhealthy expectation on him to do that. Now, I'm sure that many of them would if they could. As many times as they can, they will reach out and they will call or they will see if you need something. I think if there are churches where there are small group leaders or deacons or elders, I feel like when the church can kind of divide up that responsibility to where the leaders are serving those underneath their care, that's when it's going to work the best because they're going to know their people. I mean, if you're in a small group, your small group leader is going to know you. They're going to know if you're going through something difficult. They're going to feel like they have that relationship with you to say, hey, what can we do for you? How can we help? And that's where it's going to work best. Now, not all churches have small groups or people that serve in that capacity, which makes it hard too. And so I would say that if you're in that position of needing the encouragement and help, you do have to kind of be willing to put yourself out there sometimes and say, you know what, this is how you can help and list out specifically. And if you need help with your kids, then you say, hey, I need help. I need someone to watch my kids after school for a couple of hours, or I need someone to run to the grocery store for me. And it's hard for us to name things specifically like that because it makes us feel weak, or it makes us feel we want to be able to do it by ourselves and we can't. And so it's so hard. I think another area where we get tripped up is that maybe someone does hear about your struggle and so they volunteer to help in a certain way, which is not a way that you need help in, but you feel obligated to expect it because they're offering. And so in those circumstances, I would say we have to be willing to step up and say, you know what, I really appreciate your offer to go to the grocery store for me, but what I really need is someone to watch my kids for an hour so I can take a nap. And it's hard to say that sometimes because we appreciate that people want to help, but if it's not being helpful, we have to learn how to say that. And so I think we also have to recognize that some people have asked for help in the past and they've not gotten it. And so they're afraid to ask for help again. There are so many different scenarios that we can run through our minds. And so I would say for those on the receiving end that they need the encouragement, that they would learn how to speak up and be able to identify specifically what they need. And for those that are trying to offer the encouragement, that we give the person the chance to share that information with us, to first of all say, hey, I have cancer, because not everyone wants everyone to know that. And if they say that, being able to say, well, how can we best come alongside you right now? What do you need? And giving them time to think about it and get back to you, and following up if they don't and saying, hey, I really meant it. Like, what can we do? Do you need car rides? Do you need groceries? Like, what do you need? And it's that persistence to kind of follow through too and show them, hey, we really care about you.
It sounds like you're really talking about cultivating a culture of this rather than just, a few people who've kind of figured this out, right? Like, so a culture where people are willing to step up and ask how they can be encouraging, and a culture of safety for those people who need to ask. But as you were talking, I was just thinking, we've all heard that gossipy prayer request. And there's such a level of delicateness and discernment that needs to be part of this. Do you have any words of wisdom or guidances or cautions, guardrails, anything like that that could help people kind of navigate? Because on one hand, we want to motivate the body of Christ to help and, let people know what they need to know, but we also need to be really delicate with people's information. So if you could kind of give us some guidelines or anything along those lines, I would really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And so the way that I tend to lead is if if they share something with me and I don't know if other people know it, it stays with me. Like, unless I see it on Facebook or I hear it in church, if they're not the one sharing it, it's going to stay with me. And that's the end of it, because I want them to know that they can trust me. And if they share something with me that they find out that I've shared it with someone else without their permission, all the trust just goes out the window. I don't want that to happen. And so, unless they've specifically said that I can share it with other people, hey, or they ask to be put on the prayer request, it's staying with me. And that's all there is to it. And I know that's hard sometimes because we want other people to know, we want others to encourage them and reach out, but that's not our place. So I would say that if you want to share it in some way, you ask them very specifically, hey, I would love to put you on my church prayer list. Is that okay? And how much are you okay with me sharing? Like, can I give all the details, or you just want a very general, she has cancer and that's it? And follow their lead on that and respect their wishes on that too. I feel like that's really important. I've seen this on the flip side too, to where maybe someone sees someone struggling, but they don't want to ask the person specifically. And so they come around to you and say, hey, have you noticed, like, are they okay? And they're just coming to you for information, which it's out of a place of caring. They want to come alongside of them and reach out, but for some reason, they don't feel like they can go straight to the person. And so to kind of combat that, my response is typically, well, maybe you can call them and ask, because I think they would really appreciate your care right now and really appreciate the fact that you are checking in with them and making sure that they're okay. And sometimes they feel like they're butting in again, and it's not, you know what, if they don't want to share it with you, they're not going to. They'll say they're fine, or they'll say, you know what, I'm having a hard time, but it'll be okay. But if they want to share it with them, man, what a great opportunity for them to connect and to share that person to person instead of you getting in the middle and meddling. And so I always try to point people back towards the person or making sure I'm getting permission to share. And people are going to get mad at you for doing that, for not sharing. And you have to be okay with that because you're protecting that person and you're protecting their trust and creating that place of safety for them.
I love what you just shared, Kari, because there's like several leadership principles that I'm hearing as you're talking that I think are so important for us to keep in mind here. I mean, one of them is just this idea of confidentiality and trustworthiness. Like as leaders, people need to know that if they bring something to us that's private, that it's going to stay that way. Right. And unfortunately, sometimes that whole, what the scenario that Holly mentioned of the prayer request, which is really gossip disguised as a prayer request, sometimes can trip us up. So I think, the trustworthiness, the confidentiality, and then creating that culture of safety for people to share. And then also, just like you said, directing people back to the person who may need the encouragement without disclosing information. I just feel like those are such important principles for us to keep in mind. So, as Holly mentioned earlier, there are some people in my life that just have that gift of encouragement. Like everything they do and say just is encouraging. And I don't think that's not in my genetics or whatever. I have to work at it. So for those of us who maybe it doesn't come super naturally to be really encouraging, could you share some practical and authentic ways that we can encourage those around us? I would love like some actual, like, here's what to do examples.
Okay, so it's going to be different for all of us because if it's going to be authentic, then it's going to relate back to your gifts and it's going to relate back to your personality. And so, using myself as an example, I am a very high introvert. I need my quiet space, I need quiet time. If I don't get that over a long period of time, or if I'm around a lot of people in a short amount of time, like I can physically get sick. Like I'm an introvert. And so when it comes to encouraging others in a way that's authentic to me, relating to that, I do better with the one-on-ones and maybe a handwritten note because I can kind of take that time to think about what I want to say and share it with them and let them receive it in their own kind of private space. If you're more extroverted, then your encouragement is going to look different. And that means you're going to call up your friend and say, hey, how's it going? And check in with them. Or you might say, hey, I miss you like crazy and I know you're going through a hard time. Let's get together for coffee. And that's going to be your way to encourage them. And so I don't want us to get trapped in this idea that encouragement has to look a specific way. Encouragement can look like a calm, steady presence. Even if you don't say anything, just being there in a room with someone when they're going through a difficult time and just sitting there can be a huge encouragement to someone. So can going to a friend when you're going through a hard time and saying, I don't know what to do, and having them talk through different scenarios with you or things like that. So again, I'm going to say that we need to play to our strengths and we need to play to our gifts. And so if you're more of a teacher or if you're more of a mentor or you have that wisdom, like if someone were to come to me and ask me specifically, what should I do if they're having trouble with someone else, or I'm having a really hard time grieving and letting this go, like, what do I do? I can't always come up with the answer right off the top of my head. That's not the way I'm wired. And so I'm going to sit there quietly, awkwardly, because I don't know what to say. And so my encouragement looks like showing up regularly, being calm and peaceful and steady, and faithfully showing up time and time again. And so look to your strengths and look to your gifts and look to see kind of what that encouragement looks like. It's almost like a love language. We all encourage in different ways. And so some encourage through words and some encourage through gifts. and some encourage through acts of service, and others receive encouragement in different ways too. And so it's almost like using your love language to encourage others. So if you know what your love languages are, that would be a good place to start too.
Mm, that's really good. I like that. I've never thought about it that way before. So I'm going to turn this a little bit personal to you, Kari. I'm wondering if there's been a particular time in your own life that you've received encouragement that's been impactful, or maybe when you needed it but didn't receive it.
Yes. So I can give examples for both of those. One time, kind of back when I was in college in late high school, I really struggled with depression, and at times would just close myself off from other people because I didn't want to interact. I just kind of wanted to be by myself. And it was more challenging for me freshman year of college because, again, I was a high introvert, but I shared a room with three other girls. So that introvert time was not there. And so that kind of made it a little bit more challenging too. But just had those seasons of just really had a hard time, was just kind of dark, didn't want to talk to other people. And there were professors or other students who would just periodically notice that maybe it was a hard day and would just kind of come up alongside me on the sidewalk walking between classes. And all they would do is just, they would come up alongside me and say, "Hey, are you okay?" And that's all it took. Like sometimes I would share more with them and sometimes I wouldn't, but just that simple question of, "Are you okay?" showed me that they noticed that something was off that day. And it showed me that they cared about me and that I matter enough to them that they're going to risk kind of putting themselves out there a bit and saying, "Hey, they're checking in with me." And so I've really learned how to carry that out too. And I use that too when I see someone having a hard time. Like, it's a really good question to ask without intruding. You know what? Because again, it lets them know that you see them, that they're having a hard time. And it lets them know that you've noticed it and you just want to check in of, "Hey, are you doing okay today?" And they can say yes, or they can say no, or they can whatever. But just asking the question really helps. But there was a time a few years later where, again, I was just having a really hard time. And actually, I had let my heart kind of grow hard and was upset about some things and was grieving some things and was angry about some things. And so, again, it's kind of shut everyone else out. And some people tried to reach out to me during that time. And I wasn't in a place where I could let them in. And so their attempts to kind of reach out just kind of it was like a slam door in their face. Like, I just wasn't in a place to hear that or to let them help or to talk to anybody. And that's really hard when you're that person who's trying to help, but the other person isn't going to let you. And to me, I just needed time to work through some things on my own and not talk about it with other people, but just kind of work through it with God and pray about it and get my heart in a better place. And so I think when it comes to that now, if I come across someone that I want to encourage and support and show that I care about them, if they slam the door in my face, like I kind of understand it now because I've been there and I know what that's like. And so I don't take that as like a personal rejection. It's, well, you know what? I understand that you may not be ready right now. I'm going to keep showing up. I'm here when you're ready. And you kind of keep building that relationship of trust with them so that when they are ready to talk or they're ready to kind of break out of that, then they know that you're there for them and that you're a person of trust that they can come to.
Mm, that's so important. And I'm wondering if you could talk to the person kind of on the flip side of that, who maybe didn't get the encouragement that they needed and they're now sort of closed off from leaning on the body of Christ. What would you say to them to help them trust again?
I've been there too. Sometimes leadership can be lonely, as we all know. And there's a point where I just felt like I was doing a lot of stuff on my own. And so I went before some others and I said, "Hey, I really need some encouragement right now. I need you guys to reach out and just check in and see how things are going every now and then. Like, I don't need a lot. I need someone to pull me aside after church and say, 'Hey, do you guys need anything?' Or what's going on? Or how was it today? Or something like that." And nobody answered, like no one responded to that out of a whole group of people. And it's really disheartening. And it's like you're doing that trust fall and nobody catches you. And we kind of joke around about that. But when that really happens, like it's so hard to put yourself out there again and ask for help or ask for what you need. And so it's very easy to close yourself off and to say, hey, well, I'll figure it out on my own. And I would say that if you're finding yourself in that place and you truly need the help and encouragement, that you look for those people that you felt that relationship with them. And maybe it's just one person at a time going up to them and saying, hey, I'm going through a hard time. And this is one way that you can help me if you feel like you can do that. That would mean the world to me. And it's starting with one person. There are seasons where it seems like we do go through some things on our own, even if we've asked, even if others have offered, that it reminds me of a story of David where he and his men, before he became king, they went into a battle and they came back to their camp and their families were gone because they'd gotten raided while they were gone. And so, first of all, they're all upset about that because they came back and their families are gone and who knows where they're at or if they're still alive. And so they're struggling with that grief and trying to process that. But then all of his men turn against him and they talk about killing him. And so David's in this really hard position of, what do I do? And the Bible tells us that he strengthened himself in the Lord. And there are some seasons where if you don't have those people to come alongside of you to encourage you or support you in the way that you want or need, there's seasons where we just have to really press into God and let him be that encouragement and that support for us until someone else is ready to walk alongside of us or we find that person that we can trust again. And it's really leaning on him to be that for us.
Mm. I think that's just such a good word of encouragement here at the end of the conversation to think about the fact that, I just, as you were saying that, I'm picturing Jesus on the cross, like he was forsaken by everyone around him, and there's times that that's going to happen to us too. And I think we can take solace in the fact that he, our Savior, can relate to that feeling of being alone. And he can also provide us with the comfort and the encouragement that we need during those hard seasons. And, the last kind of thought that I have, Kari, that I'd like to talk about is just going back to what you said at the beginning. I think you mentioned that it takes courage to step out and encourage others. And I think that's what holds us back a lot of times is the fear of doing it wrong, right? So I think about when my father passed away and I think about the different types of encouragement I got. And there were definitely some things that were not helpful. There were definitely some things that were awkward and now looking back, it's been so long that I can kind of laugh about it. But ultimately, I know that those people were doing their best and they were coming from a place of wanting to reach out, wanting to support. And so could you just speak to that, how to get past the fear of doing it wrong? If you have it on your heart to reach out to someone, like just kind of making that step, even if you might get it wrong once or twice and not give them the type of encouragement that they need.
Yeah, well, first, we're all going to get it wrong at some point. Like mistakes are going to happen and that's okay. I would rather we show up and try than to not show up at all. And so go ahead and say what you need to say or whatever. One of the things I found the most helpful is just being honest with the person that's hurting and you call them or you're sitting next to them and you're saying, hey, I don't know what to say to you right now to make this feel better or hurt. I just want you to know that I'm here. I think back to my grandpa's funeral where there are so many people, again, they're saying all the things and some are silly and some don't make any sense. But my grandpa's cousin came up to us, to me and my sister, and he just said, well, what can I say? And that was it. Like that was probably the most meaningful thing because there are no words. Sometimes the grief is so
Right.
hard or the grief is so deep that there are no words to express that. And so just being willing to acknowledge that and to enter the grief with them a little bit. I know this hurts. It really stinks. And I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say, but I just want you to know that I'm here. That's all you have to do.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we forget the power of just sitting with people and just sort of sitting in the grief. A lot of times we feel like we have to fix it or we feel like we have to make it okay for a few minutes. And sometimes what people really need is they just need us to sit there and to hold their hand or just physically be there. and the right words sometimes don't even matter. So I love that. I love that we're kind of wrapping up this conversation with that. And I so appreciate that because I think we've all been in those places where there isn't the right thing to say. So, yeah. So we like to ask this question of all of our guests, and you have already mentioned a book previous in the conversation. I'd love to hear what else you have to share. So we believe here at this podcast that leaders are learners. And we know our guests usually have really great resources to share, like you have already done so, a book, a podcast, or anything else. So I'm wondering if you can let our audience know something that you've been learning lately and kind of share what that is.
Yeah, so most of my learning lately has been more about learning the business side of things because I had more than 12 years in church ministry and now I'm a small business owner. And so, hey, trying to learn all the things that I need to know. And so, I am listening to a lot of podcasts and things like that, trying to learn what I need to know. But most of what I'm learning is actually coming from other people. And so it's been having those coffee chats or a peer business group of things where I'm just asking lots of questions and I'm gaining all the wisdom from all these people that have gone before me. And so I am an avid reader. I love to read, but right now I am just learning from others and being willing to ask the questions that might feel stupid, but I'm learning.
Oh, that's so good, Kari, because I think that, we've talked about this before too on the podcast. It's like being coachable and being willing to put yourself in that role of the learner instead of the leader, that will help you be successful for the long term, for sure. So as we wrap up, I just want to thank you for everything you've shared. I think this has been such a good conversation that will be valuable to our listeners. So I appreciate what you've shared. And I would love for you to share, where can people learn more about what you have going on? What do you have that you would want to share with them? Feel free to share any of the links and we'll make sure this is all in the show notes too.
Sure. So the best place to find us is at our website, which is www.lovedoesnt.org. And there you can find some different articles and you can find a link to our gift shop because we do offer some gifts to send to those who are going through difficult times. We have encouragement cards and tear bottles and things of that nature to where just sometimes a gift is a meaningful gesture to them. And so you'll find that information there. And actually, there's a free guide that I would love to share with people called Tips for Encouraging Others When You're Still Healing. Because sometimes we are going through those difficult times, and yet we still feel like we should be reaching out and encouraging others. So trying to navigate that when you're hurting, how do you help encourage others can be really challenging. And so we have a free guide, and you can get to that by going to lovedoesthat.org/healing, and you can sign up for that. And it's a great way to kind of look at some biblical principles to help you figure out what that looks like.
Kari, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate all of your wisdom and encouragement to our leaders that are listening. And I know that it's been very helpful to me. So I really thank you so much for being with us. And yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for letting me share.
Thanks for joining us on the Christian Women Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, come and join us in our private Facebook community. We would love to get to know you better so that we can make sure the podcast is providing what you need. Plus, you can share your questions and ideas, and you'll be surrounded by incredible Christian women leaders. To join the group, visit estherlittlefield.com/group. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.